Alright guys, in today's video we're going to show how to remove the turbocharger assembly off the Ecotec 1.4 liter engines that you'd find in the Chevy Sonic, the Chevy Cruze, the Chevy Trax, and the Buick Encore of the years in the video title. I'm going to show you a lot of detail in this video, GM part numbers, torque values, service manual information including special tools, and a lot of close-up views and shots on how you both install this and remove this. So stay tuned. All right, guys, before we tear into this project, I'm going to let you hear what this sounds like, this engine sounds like with this cracked manifold. Now, when we get into it, we'll figure out if it's actually on the manifold or the turbo housing that's making this sound. But let me have you guys hear this when we fire this engine up. All right, so that's pretty bad. That's what caused it to fail inspection. It's not anything with the exhaust lines or system. It's actually with the turbos. All right, guys, as we tear into this, we can see this isn't the first time this vehicle has likely had its turbo replaced. This is a 2012 Ecotec 1.4 sitting in a Chevrolet Cruze. It's going to be the same procedure. If it's a Sonic, if it's a Buick Encore, if it's a Chevy Trax, they all use the same engine. They all have the same turbo for the model years that the video title says. We can see that the left lift bracket is missing on this engine. Like there's supposed to be one like this over here. A lot of times you remove that to make it easier to get the turbo in and out. So that tells me that somebody probably has been here before and just forgot to put it back on. You can also see that this E10 star bolt here has been damaged by using the incorrect socket. A lot of times people will try to put a regular hex head socket on these instead of using an E socket like you're supposed to, and that can result in the damage we see here. So it looks like it's been done before. Let's go ahead and get the heat shield off so that we can see what's going on. But before we do that, I'm going to put a cover down on this part of the vehicle. And the reason is, just speaking from experience, guys, this open cavity here where the hood latch is, every small tool, fastener, and socket that you're working with is going to want to walk inside there and disappear. So I put something on here whenever I'm doing this kind of stuff just to prevent that from happening. All right, so let's get these bolts off here. And we've got this vehicle up on ramps. I'm just going to use a breaker bar to loosen them up. Take them off the rest of the way with the ratchet. Let's see if we can get on this damaged one. So already I see at least three things I got to go pick up from the salvage yard. That left-hand side bracket, the bolt for it, and another one of these bolts to replace this damaged one. We got that one off there. The third one is right down here, attached to the turbo itself. All right, I'm just going to switch to the ratchet. We'll pull this off. And then you guys don't need to sit through all this and pulling these bolts off. I'll get these off and we'll come back. All right, guys, just taking out the last of these bolts here. Like I said, this is the one we're going to toss and replace with a salvage yard donor because it's damaged. I've already got the other two out. Put those guys out. Just kind of wiggle this guy out of there. We can see the turbo. So the first thing you want to check if you've got a different problem going on, like a P0299 code. This particular vehicle doesn't have any codes. One of the things you want to check here, you see there's a little retainer that holds this wastegate actuator arm onto the wastegate lever that's part of the turbo. Sometimes this little clip can come off and cause this actuator not to be attached to that arm. That can be a simple fix. You can get that clipped from GM as a separately serviceable part without having to replace the whole turbo if you got that problem going on. Another problem can be that this actuator itself is actually damaged. That one's harder to test. You kind of have to leave the shield off and watch to see if it's actuating the turbo or not. Usually what happens is these things get so rusted up and cracked internally from stress, heat stress, that the actuator can't move them, and that ends up condemning the whole unit. But this piece here is separately serviceable from GM. The other thing that you can have happen is the oil inlet here, which comes in from the engine block, runs under here, goes into the top, lubricates the spinning part of the turbine, and then exits down the bottom on a plastic return that we'll see later. You can sometimes get this caked up, particularly if it's an older design that doesn't have the heat shield on it, and you can separately replace this. This is another one of these star bolts down here, an E10. I believe this is a T45. And you can replace that separately too without having to pull the whole thing. The other thing that can go wrong is you can get a leak on this coolant outlet line. It's metal here and then rubber here where the heat shielding is. It's like tubing. Quick and dirty fix is you can just cut the metal pipe and just install another piece of rubber with a couple of hose clamps. That's not an OEM fix, but that's something that you could do to avoid having to pull the whole turbo just to change a leaking piece of hose there. The outlet, this is the outlet, the inlet on the coolant that we can't see is all metal, so there's usually not a problem with that. It attaches to the block with a banjo bolt, much like this oil filler tube here, 17 millimeter versus the T-Torx type that's used on the oil. At this point though, we still, on this particular vehicle, I'm not seeing the obvious place of the crack. So we're just going to continue with the process of having to remove it. It's the only way we're going to be able to tell for sure where that is. It's obviously having that problem with the sound and failed inspection for the state for that reason. So we're going to have to yank it. So we're going to be following the service manual procedure for this. I'll give you guys a gander at that. Hopefully there's not too much glare. And we're going to be deviating from the service manual in just a couple of ways. I'm not going to be pulling the catalytic converter off. I'm just going to be loosening it. But other than those steps, I'm going to be following this pretty much, right? At this point, they're telling you to, obviously we got the hood. I'm not going to disconnect the negative battery cable. If you know what you're doing, you can skip that. I'm not going to be draining the cooling system from the front. We're going to drain that from a different place. I'll show you that when we get to it. We're not going to do that at this time. We'll kind of do it a little bit out of order. We are going to do the outlet duct next. We are going to disconnect the crankcase ventilation pipe from the turbocharger. We just removed the manifold heat shield. We are going to disconnect the wastegate regulator solenoid valve wiring harness. I'll show you that. We're going to take off the oil feed pipe. I just showed you that. That was the piece that we were talking about held on with that banjo bolt. We can see in the graphic. That's this assembly here with the pipe running over to there. As you take these pieces off, the service manual is very good about telling you what parts have to be tossed because they cannot be reused. Obviously, all the seals, all of the gaskets, they go in the recycle bin. You have to replace all of that. We'll remove that oil feed bolt. The next thing that we're going to remove after the oil field pipe is we're going to work on those coolant return hoses, and this is actually where we're going to do the draining. And we're going to remove the bolts securing that. The rest of the hose at the bottom, the cooler inlet air hose, so we get inlet and outlet removed. They're going to talk about some special tools here for that. I'm going to explain why we're not going to use that and what it's supposed to be for, but why you can avoid having to do that. So let me go through all of these steps, and we'll video it out and come back on and pick it up at step 15. So we're going to go through the first, 13 or 14 steps here. So let's get in. All right, guys, we're going to start here. You can either use a 7 millimeter socket or a slotted screwdriver. I am going to elect to go the screwdriver route. So I'm going to loosen this spring clamp for the upper part of the outlet hose. Then I'm going to switch to a smaller screwdriver to fit in here and do this lower one right here. Okay, with these both loosened up, separate off this hose assembly. The next thing we've got is the crankcase ventilation inlet. That's this piece right here. This is removed. You see there's a piece of this assembly. Hopefully, there's a lot of glare. It's one of those kind of strange things where it's bright and sunny out, but sometimes you can't see. But hopefully you guys can see this. There are some serrations on this, which is indicating where you squeeze this pipe. Actually, take my glove off. So right here, we're going to squeeze this pipe, and that'll allow us to remove this piece. Okay. There's a vacuum line held on with a clip here and then attached down there with a spring clamp. We're going to get it out of the clip first, just in case we need some room with it. And then we're going to come down here and we're going to get a pair of pliers and get this clamp released. There's a number of different tools you might try. I like these 90-degree long nose pliers because I'm going to be able to come in from this angle here, hopefully, and get this little guy. Might end up doing something else, I don't know. Actually cannot twist that. Ah! All right, let's show something else. This is the electrical connection they were talking about. In order to get that off, there's a metal retaining clip. You can see that right here. I'm going to take this flathead screwdriver. It's right next to this vacuum line. And we're going to pull that out. If we can get him, let me try a larger screwdriver here, get a little bit more leverage. I'm kind of coming in here at an awkward angle just so I can film this for you guys. There it goes. All right, so we're going to remove this guy here. And with that guy removed, we can remove the electrical connector. It just comes right off with that metal line removed. All right, so we still need to get our little vacuum line down there. And the tool of choice didn't work out for me, but I got a different tool that might have a bit more of a curve to it, just so that we can get in there and nab that guy. And let's see if this does it. This is another type of long nose plier. I have to move our flashlight for a moment. A different spot for him. Let's see if we can get this in here. It's just, it has been put on in a really awkward position. Want to get it flipped up first. There we go. So that we can get a better grip on it. Now we can get this guy pushed back. Well, hopefully we can get him pushed back. Hopefully you guys can see this. I think what I'm going to do is just pull the line off. Worry about this later. All right, guys, unfortunately, I have got to move the camera so that I can get into a position to pull this vacuum line off. When you go to do this, you'll see what I mean. It's not a big deal to get off, but you've got to be like right here instead of over here where I am. All right, guys, now that we got that spring clamp pushed back, we can just take our tool, work it in here, and get the hose off of the nipple, and that part's done. All right, guys, next we're going to do this oil inlet I mentioned to you. You got another E10 retaining bolt right here next to the pipe itself. Loosen that guy up and take him off by hand, presuming you've let everything cool down, right? So just a small retaining bolt there. And then to get the banjo type bolt off, we're going to switch to our T45 Torx. Now, depending on how long you've let the engine sit, and if the oil hasn't drained back down, you may get some runoff here. That's normal. Okay. All right, so now this is a kind of a friction fit that's retained by this bolt. So now I'm going to put my gloves back on before I get too much of this oil and grease on me. And now we're going to go pull this guy out. All right, that's simple. It comes right out. Set that aside. So we just had a very little bit of oil come out. Most of it drained back down already. What we're also going to do at this time before we forget is over here with our air inlet, we're going to stick a rag in here so we don't have any critters cruising in on that direction. Kind of leave this out so it catches our attention so we remember it's in there. Since we're swapping the turbo out, we don't really care what drops down there, but you might want to put one down there because You never know, one of these fasteners or a socket can fall down there as well. All right, so the next thing I'm going to remove is kind of minor, but we're going to take off these two standoffs that are 10 millimeter. These do not come on the new turbo. They have to be transferred over from the old one. Trying to find the 10 millimeter socket here. It is 10 millimeter. Extension's a little long. Pop this in here. And you just have to loosen them up so you can spin them out by hand. And these two guys will transfer over to the new turbocharger when we get it unboxed. I'll go over all the parts and the GM part numbers as always after we get everything disassembled here. All right, the next thing we're going to remove is the bottom air hose, which is down here. And again, we can either use a 7 millimeter or a slotted screwdriver. This guy right here. Going to opt for using a small slotted screwdriver down there. And that's another one that once we get it removed, we're going to put a rag in there to keep debris out of it. Just another spring clamp. Looser you get it, the less you have to fight with it. All right. Oops. Okay, that guy's off. We're going to put another rag in there. Keep debris and critters out of the parts we care about. All right, at this point now, what we've got left, we're going to end up at some point removing these 8, 4 on top here and then 4 on the bottom. You can see number 5 right over here, hopefully. Right back there. The access to 6, 7, and 8 we're getting at by removing these other pieces. That's one of the last things we'll pull. Before we pull that, we're going to be undoing this bolt here so that we can remove this clamp, and then we're going to go underneath so that we can have access to the oil drain pipe that's on the bottom that I mentioned. There's a couple of 8 millimeter bolts there that we can only access, or I think it may be E10. I got to go down there and check and see what it is, that we can only access from below. So I'm going to go do this piece, and then we're going to go underneath. All right, guys, just going to put a little PB blaster on these threads. This is a 13 millimeter holding this exhaust clamp on. So far, everything's coming apart nicely with no broken fasteners. Yay for that, right? I'm going to just go ahead and take this whole bolt off. The nut's captive. Take the whole bolt off because this is another piece that the service manual is going to tell you to toss anyway. It's not reusable. So I'm just going to get it out of the way so it's not holding on to the turbo. Set the bolt aside. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to get started on this guy. In a previous video, we replaced this hose because it had rotted out and was leaking, corroded this spring clamp. So we're going to reuse that since it's not even a few weeks old. But normally you'd want to replace this clamp. It's one of the part numbers I'll give you later. But we're going to pull this clamp down and we're going to separate this. We're going to get our pan underneath and we're going to start draining out this coolant. One of the things we're going to do as part of getting ready for that is get ready to cap this guy off. So again, we're just going to get this guy down below the nipple. Always going to have problems getting the flashlight in the best spot. Now I'm not going to pull this all the way off. I'm just trying to get it released a little bit. I'll show you guys what I'm going to do here. Okay, I'm going to pull it down like that, and then I'm going to clamp it off with a hose clamp. Just want to get the right size. All right. Now I know what the size is. I'm going to get my pan underneath. And I'm going to get a piece of hose. If I can find it. Let me go get a piece of hose, guys. All right, guys, got my pipe. Pinch our guy here off. I get some of it is going to spill, but we're going to get the bulk of it in this little hose. All right, and we're going to just drain this down from the upper part of the water outlet here. I'm going to go ahead and keep this on here in case. Yeah. She's purring like a kitten. Just kind of letting the air go in now. That's all you're hearing. All right, so we're going to come back. We're going to let this go. I'm going to keep this held in. We're going to let this go until it's clear. And then we're going to put a nipple on it. And we're going to hook it up, a barb, and we're going to hook it up to the other side of the pipe. We'll drain out what's coming off this side. All right, once this one's not draining anything, we're going to switch it over to this guy and then drain out what's running through the turbo itself. So we'll let this guy go and we'll come back. All right, we just about got this done, guys. It's just a little bit of a drizzle. Just trying to, have gravity help us with this, suck all the coolant that's out of the lines that are attached to the turbo, and hopefully cut down any drizzle we'll get from the block when we remove the inlet banjo that's attached to the block itself. So at this point now, we're going to go underneath and get those bolts that are holding on the turbo drain pipe. All right, guys, underneath the car now, if you do decide to try and remove the catalytic converter, like I said, I'm not going to do that, but I will show you what you have to do. Right in the back here, you've got these 3 nuts that you'll have to take off. Not really good light on that one, but there you go. So you can take these 3 nuts off, and you'll have to replace the exhaust gasket that's behind here. And this piece back here is flexible. And so this pipe will just bend down. There's a bracket here, and that's one of the ones that we're going to loosen up. But what I want to try and get you a view now is I'm not going to be able to show you removing these bolts on this turbo oil drain, just because of the nature of how cramped it is down here. But I do want you to be able to see them. So I'm going to try to get you a view of at least the first one. So let's see if how this looks. All right, so that bolt right there, so I can zoom in on it. That's one of the 2 that you got to remove. It's holding this pipe. This kind of gray pipe here that I'm just right in front of the flashlight that goes into the engine block. That's one of them. After we loosen these bolts I mentioned for the catalytic converter, bracket right there, and the other one, we should be able to move this out of the way to get to the second one. I'll show you that when we get. Guys, the other bolt that's holding the catalytic converter bracket is viewable from the top, and it's right here if we zoom in, right? So there's another 10 millimeter right there that will loosen up, and between that one and the one on the bottom I showed you, we'll be able to move the catalytic converter around so that we can get access to these turbo oil drain bolts. You can actually feel one of them right here. I don't know if you guys can see it. That my finger there, but that's touching one of them. If you do end up disconnecting the if you do end up disconnecting the catalytic converter, remember that this O2 sensor right here, this blue line, is not going to have a lot of slack, and you're going to have to come up here where it connects up to this bracket. And a lot of times these little clips on this bracket are broke off. But you come in behind here and you can pinch those and release it, and then you grab this piece here with 2 fingers. It's kind of hard for me to do it with not taking it off myself, and pull it up, and that'll allow you to unplug this. That'll give you enough slack if you end up going that route. I'm not going to be removing the catalytic converter, so just point that out if you were. All right, guys, we got an extension on this breaker bar. We're going to see if we can work this bolt loose, this 10 millimeter that's holding that catalytic converter bracket. It's the first one we've encountered that's a little bit non-cooperative. So we had to do some PB blaster on it, but that got it loose. Now we can ratchet it loose enough to move the catalytic converter. All right, guys, once you get that loosened up and you get this V-clamp out of the way, you can see that the catalytic converter is going to have a lot of play in it, which is what we want so that we can move it around and get access to these 2 bolts that are holding the turbo drain. Once we pull those guys, we'll be ready to then get the 8 nuts that are holding the exhaust manifold on, as well as the 117 millimeter that's holding the coolant inlet pipe on. These guys are going to be either probably, I think they're T45s. Double check that. Yeah, they're either T45s or they're also hexed on the outside, probably for 10 millimeter. I don't know. Let's see. Yep, 10 millimeter. So it's either way you can get them off with either tool that you have. And you probably have to have the T45 to have gotten off this oil inlet pipe anyway. Got it. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and go underneath now and show you how we remove those 2 E10s that are holding on the turbo drain, and then we'll be able to turn our attention to the last of these bolts that are, or excuse me, fasteners that are holding it onto the engine. All right, guys, now we have enough access. Come in here with our E10, and we can remove the first of these bolts holding the oil drain tube from the bottom of the turbo. So you can see me getting this one from above. I really can't show it to you from below. I'm going to reposition the cat, and then we'll show the other side. Go. All right, so guys, here's the catalytic converter, and then here's one of the underside splash shields. To get that last bolt off, after we get this positioned, after removing those 2 10 millimeter nuts so that we can move it, to get the right access, we got to take this splash shield off. There's a couple of 8 millimeter bolts. There's 2 in the front, and there's 1 towards the back of this piece of plastic. So we're going to remove those. There's also some plastic fasteners like these that we'll remove with a trim tool. I'll show you that next. All right, so guys, after you get those 3 bolts out to hold this plastic on, there's 3 plastic retainers. There's one here, kind of like on the inside of the fender well. There's one here, and then there's one right underneath right here. And to get them off, just take a trim tool or a small flathead screwdriver. You just want to prise up the little center pin, and with the center pin prized up, it releases the tension on the lower part of the pin, and you can remove them. So take those 3 out, and then you can drop this piece of plastic. All right, guys, with this panel off, we can get a good view of the turbo drain pipe going into the engine block and then going up into the bottom of the turbo. We can see we've got our socket, our E10 socket, and our extension. We're working this guy off. Of course, you know, I'm holding the phone with my right hand. I'm twisting it with my left, so I'm not going to be able to complete this, but I'm just giving you guys the perspective of what this looks like. All right, guys, let's pick back up where we are in the book, right? So we're down to this point. I said we were going to come back here before we remove the coolant inlet, and I mentioned that the dealerships, GM has this special tool that they put in place before they run the socket through. And all that does is it grabs, if we take a look at the oil line that we removed off, it slips over the banjo bolt and prevents any twisting occurring that might damage this union during manufacturing, where these guys are either, looks like maybe they're brazed together or something like that. That's all this tool does. Do you need it? Well, they wouldn't waste any money on it if you didn't. If you're careful and you don't over torque things, in my opinion, you can get away with it. So that's what we're going to be doing. So we're going to go back after that 17 millimeter banjo bolt on the cooling inlet, and then we're going to go after these 8 nuts that are holding the exhaust manifold on, and that's all we really have left. We just completed removing the turbocharger oil return line bolts that I showed you underneath, those 2 E10s. So at this point, after we get through with removing this guy and those 8, we're ready to take it off. All right, guys, home stretch here, right? So before we take off these manifold nuts, we got to get that last water inlet 17 millimeter that I talked about, and you can see it right there in this view. And I'm not going to be able to necessarily keep the flashlight where you can see that, but what I'm going to be doing, if we kind of pivot up here, I'm going to be coming in with a wrench and get in a position, and I'll show you guys. So you got to get it at a certain angle here. All right. Give me a moment, guys, to get the socket, the 17 millimeter socket on that banjo bolt, and then I'll show you the setup. Okay. All right, so you're going to come in right in this area here of the turbo, right underneath it, right on top of the air conditioning compressor. And that is going to put you right where you need to be to get on that nut that we were looking at earlier. If we kind of zoom in there, we're situated on it. So hopefully I can leave the flashlight there. I'm going to have to shift the camera over a little bit to get my hand in here. Now you're going to have a little bit of coolant come out again, because you can never get all of it even if you drained it out the radiator. That's why I don't bother doing the radiator anymore. Trying to get the ratchet wrench set to loosen instead of tighten here. All right. All right, doesn't take much to loosen it. At least in my case, it didn't. As soon as it starts turning, I'm going to go make sure that we have that same drain pan in position from last time. We caught pretty much all of this. If we kind of just take a moment to take a look at that and go down here on the ground, we've gotten about 4 quarts of coolant out of here. You can see the bolt in here that I used to weigh down that pipe that I used to do the drain. Very, very little bit of it missed this. So you want to try and catch as much as this you can for 2 reasons. One, you can take it to the recycling place. That's number 1. Number 2, you want to get it off the ground because it can cause kidney failure in many mammals, right? So a dog, a cat, squirrel or something comes over and licks this stuff up. It can cause them to be dead within, a day or 2. So you definitely want to try to keep it in the container and keep it cleaned up as much as you can. All right, let's continue with getting this guy off. Now you'll know when you've got it because there will be some coolant dripping, and you can hear it now. Falling into our pan, which is confirmation that we have captured it correctly. So we're going to let that pee out, and then we're going to turn our attention now to these manifold nuts. Like I said, you can try to take them off with a T45 or a 10 millimeter. We'll try a T45. I went ahead and sprayed a little PB blaster in here. All right, so there's one. Actually, I'm going to switch to a shorter extension. Don't think I quite need one that long. Wish I could find my shorter extension, though. Decided to walk on me. There it is. All right, these ones on top, I'm not going to necessarily show you all these. These are very straightforward to get off. I'm going to take these 4 on the top off, and then I'll show you, we'll come back and I'll show you how you go about getting the 4 below. But these, pretty much just break the rust. If you can't get it internally with the T, then you can try externally with the 10 millimeter. They might bring the whole stud out with them. That's fine. We can separate them out later and reinstall the stud. So I'm going to go ahead and pull these 4 and we'll come back. All right, guys, one of these ones on top, if we zoom in here, you can see it didn't just pull the stud out, the stud snapped, and that happens. So we're going to have to go through a few techniques to either try and extract the piece that's stuck in the head, or if we can't get it out, drill it out and helicoil it and put a new stud in. Guys, working on the bottom row here, we are using a 1/4-inch 10 millimeter drive with a bar here to give us some leverage. And you can see we're working this guy off. Now let me show you the access on the other 3. So for the other 3, we'll go ahead and use our 3/8. One guy is right here. I don't know if you can see it. Had to get the flashlight to let go of the ratchet wrench on the magnet. All right, so you can see hopefully this guy turning in here. If we zoom in and come up at an angle. Right, so there's that guy. So that's number 6. And then you come in right underneath this actuator arm. If you can see this one here, here's number 7. Now number 7, I can see that is one of those ones I was explaining to you where it's going to take the stud out along with the nut. I'm going to go ahead and take this one out and show you what we're talking about. Almost. So this guy here a second. Just kind of wiggle it out by hand. I think we'll be able to show it to you. I don't know. Really long when it comes out like this. There it goes. All right, so you can see what has happened in this case is the nut didn't let go of the stud and pulled the stud out with it. So we'll have to remove the nut from the stud and reinstall it. This is no big deal. This is okay. All right, and then the other guy, last guy, you come right under here. And again, guys, apologize. I'm kind of doing this awkward here because the camera is where I would normally want to be. There we go. All right. And hopefully if you come in a little bit on this side with the camera, you can see this guy turning. Right? And so we're getting number 8 off here. So let me go ahead and take these last 2 off, and then with those 2, that's the only thing holding it on. We'll be able to remove it. All right, guys, for these 2 that came out with the studs, I'm going to show you real quick how you can get those off. These copper-clad exhaust nuts are not reusable, so they're going to get tossed anyway, so it's okay if we damage them in the process. I'm going to toss those guys real tight into a vise, and then I'm going to Let's see if I can raise this up just a hair. Then I'm going to put a couple of M8 1.25 nuts on here. And we're going to jam these up to each other. Take a wrench and a socket, jam them up, make sure the vise is tight. Grab the one that's on the bottom here. And it should, there it goes, should bring that stud right out. Now if it doesn't, what you can do is you can get a propane torch. Doesn't take much heat usually to let these guys loose. And you can heat up that exhaust nut before doing what I'm doing right here. And that'll let it go. I'm going to do the same thing to the other one, and then we'll come back. All right, we got all those off. Now there's this little plate here and the exhaust manifold itself that we can wiggle off. Okay. So we'll leave this guy on until we get this all the way off. Want to make sure if you're binding on anything, like we are, we'll make sure that we got that 17 millimeter all the way out. Might have a couple of threads still hanging on it. So let me hit that a few more times and that should let it go. All right, guys, yep, it was that 17. Had to hit it a few more times. Also, forgot to pull this 10 millimeter bolt that's retaining the bracket for the coolant outlet line. So whenever you get resistance on something like this, you always want to go slow and try to find out where the resistance is coming from. Even somebody like myself that's done this before can make a mistake like this. Sorry, I'm blocking your view for a moment. I'm just spinning this guy out by hand. Trying to, anyway. Might have to give him a couple more hits. All right, come on, buddy. Kind of long. All right, there he is. Yeah, he's kind of long. All right, that should free up that pipe. The 17's free. Just had a couple more threads on it. Now we should be able to lift this guy out. No problem. Kind of watch where everything is so it doesn't get hung up on anything else. And there we go, we got it out. All right, guys, a couple more cleanup things. We're going to come over here to where our oil inlet came out. Gonna clean that guy up. We're going to find a small wadded up piece of rag, and we're going to stick that in there for the same reason that we blocked off our air hoses. We don't want any crud or crap to get in there. All right, I actually bungeed off, if you see down here, I bungeed this lower hose out of the way so that we wouldn't have to deal with that. Let's go ahead and get our manifold, exhaust manifold gasket material off here. This is all going to get discarded. Yeah, there we go. Actually, we're already, we can see part of the problem that we had with the exhaust leak. We can see where the gasket had failed here. Right, so we had to do all that work mostly to get at this. But I'm sure there's some issues with the turbo itself. Let's keep going. Next thing we got left is this oil drain pipe. Take the gasket off of it, just snaps off. Little metal piece that snaps off the top of it. Now these things are really prone to breaking. Really prone to breaking. I don't expect to get it off without part of it breaking. I guess the next thing I'm going to do before I go grab that is I'm just going to take a look inside of our catalytic converter, and we're going to make sure that we don't have any pieces. If we zoom in, we want to make sure we don't have any pieces of the turbo if anything did go wrong there. Lying inside, I'm looking for now is a small mirror that I can get in there so you guys can see and I can see, and we can kind of verify that that is the case. So yeah, I don't see anything in the crevices that is obstructing our view. So it looks good. So we're also going to shove a paper towel or rag, whatever you can grab, in this guy too for the same reason. We don't want any crud getting in here. Probably going to put more than one. And then next thing we're going to do is going to try to wiggle this guy out. So what you can try to do is what I'm doing here. Just wiggle, 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 wiggle. Small pulling up. Sometimes it'll go. Usually that's what happens. They break off. Totally to be expected. Even with this heat shield around here, the way this thing is designed by GM, this upper piece is metal, this lower piece is plastic, and it just gets brittle and breaks. So what we're going to have to do is, just piecemeal continue working this out. The strongest piece of this thing, this left in there, is usually, find something to point with here, usually this little clip here. And what we'll try to do is we'll try to see if this guy at least will rotate. See if I can get a place for our friend, the flashlight. And I'm using that sarcastically in terms of the friendship with the flashlight. But I'm hoping if we can get under here, maybe we can prise it a little bit. Might have to come in from underneath and get a better view. What we don't want to have happen is we don't want this thing to, break off and have pieces go in the engine block and create a lot more work. I'm just trying to see if we can get it to let go. So I'm just going to work at it like this. I'm not going to use any solvents like, PB Blaster or something, but I might put some 3-in-1 oil around the outside edge to wick around there in case what we're dealing with is the O-ring being stuck inside the block. But this is our next hard part right here, is working this guy off. All right, guys, what I ended up doing, I broke off, not too hard with this stuff, the little retainer that holds on to the ridge. And I'm taking these 90-degree long nose pliers, and I'm just applying steady pressure up from the bottom. Well, I thought that was going to get him out. Looks like a little piece of it broke off inside. I hate these guys. I hate these guys. All right, we got to continue up here. What I'm going to do on this, I've seen this before too. We're going to put some rags down in below this guy, and then we're going to use a tool to pull the little pieces that didn't make it. Let me go see how much of it didn't make it. Fell into our coolant container. It's just a very, very tip of it. You guys can see. There's the O-ring. So it just broke off at the very, very end. We almost got lucky and got the whole thing out. You can see where the rust lines here, we had managed to get those separated with a little 3-in-1 oil. But this last piece was just too weak. I don't know. I really, really detest the use of plastic parts around critical engine components, but I know everybody's trying to build these cars only to last 100,000 miles. All right, let's continue. All right, guys, actually, I was about to go thinking I had to do this the hard way. It just gave out right at the end. I'm just taking this little hooked pick, and I'm just reaching under here, and I can see it's moving. Now, who knows? It might break on me again here. But I'm hoping that just being patient with this thing, you can see it's moved up a millimeter or so. We might be able to get it out. There it goes, right there. All right. So not as much work as it could have been. So, this is why you're going to see that I'm replacing this. Obviously, you almost have to. Okay, we're going to take a rag and stick it down there. Obviously, we don't want any crud falling inside the engine crankcase area. This is just temporary for now. I'll come and clean it up later. All right, at this point, we have gotten everything out that we needed to get out with this turbo. We got some things on the turbo we need to remove, and we've got some problems we need to go deal with the ones that the studs came out with the nuts. I'm not really liking some of these studs that have got a lot of rust right at the part where they go on the block, but this will probably be the last turbo this particular car gets. It's got around 96, 97,000 miles on it. We'll see if we can get it over 100 with this repair. All right, guys, and then one other thing we need to take off is a seal. There's a metal seal that goes between the turbo and the catalytic converter. That's going to be replaced as well. So if we take a look at the old unit and we try to do some diagnosis on what caused the leak, never did find any cracks or anything on this exhaust manifold, but we do see where the soot marks tell us that the gasket had begun to fail, and then of course we can see where it catastrophically failed here. So of the 3 layers that comprise this guy, if we separate them out here, right, so we can see here, here is part of the catastrophic failure, but all of this heat, color changing damage, and all of this soot shows how this had actually probably those studs that came out with the nuts probably were not fully torqued down here. We can also see there's like, if you zoom really far in here, you can actually feel it with your fingernail. There's like a, I guess I'll call it like an indentation or a divot or a cut. It's not a crack, it's just an indentation here that probably also contributed to allowing hot exhaust gases to seep out from this seam and attack this. Now there's something else on the cylinder head we're going to take a look at next as part of this, and kind of confirms that this was the reason for the failure. So we definitely obviously have to toss the gasket. I don't think we would have to condemn the turbocharger. There's no other obvious problems with it. The turbine spins freely inside here. You want to see these things spin very free with your finger at no binding. I can take the let's get this little V-clamp off of here. That's another thing we got to discard. I can take the little clamp, or excuse me, clip off of here and remove the actuator rod from the lever, and we can test how well the wastegate valve is working. I don't see any major stress cracks. There is one right down there in that crevice, but if you look on GM service bulletins, a couple of very small hairline cracks like that are considered normal for this particular design, and they wouldn't have changed them out under warranty unless they had much more significant cracks than that. It's just the constant heat and cool cycles does result in some metallurgic stress that results in those. So let's go take a look at the cylinder head. All right, so if we take a look at the cylinder head and we look at this exhaust port where the failure occurred, you can also feel just a small, I guess I'll call it a divot here, and this is just where I suspect that the exhaust gases started to attack and corrode the aluminum. It's not a crack. It looks almost more like a chip, except there's no sharp edges. And it's just right at the bottom here of the flange area on this one port. So I'll tell you a little bit later how we're going to address that and get a good seal when we put this stuff back together. All right, guys, whether you're going to reinstall the original turbocharger after addressing this, or whether you're going to get a new one, there's some considerations with the coolant hoses. So in this case of this rubber one, it's really recommended to replace it because this can and will start rotting out and cause a leak. And you already have everything off, so why not? You absolutely have to replace these seals that go on either side of the banjo bolt. They kind of fuse themselves to the header here. I'll get them off of the flathead and show you later. So at a minimum, you'd have to change out those. But while you're in here, my philosophy is just to change the whole thing out. If you take a 17mm flare wrench, you should be able to get that to fit in here and loosen these guys. So just a couple of whacks with a hammer. I'll usually be the level of persuasion you need. I'm going to go ahead and work this fitting out, and we'll come back and do the other one. All right, guys, we got the inlet off, and there's another one of those sealing washers here. So again, if for some reason you were reusing this one, 1, 2, 3 sealing washers would have to be replaced. The outlet is also a 17. Get the flare wrench in position, same technique. And by the way, these are all supposed to rotate on this for ease of assembly and disassembly. So if yours are binding up, when you do this step, You might want to put some lubricant down there and address that if you're planning on reusing them so that you don't damage the piping, get it crimped or something of that nature. All right, once we get this guy off, we've completed the level of disassembly that you would do on the turbocharger. Everything else stays together. And like I was saying earlier, the serviceable things on this from General Motors, the clip, the actuator, which is held on by these two nuts here, and the boost sensor. Those are all things that can be separately serviced, but the exhaust manifold is only sold married to this Garrett turbocharger. It's the only way you can order the parts. So if we did find out that this had a crack in it, what I probably would have elected to do is go to the salvage yard and take one off of a salvage yard vehicle that still had its GM turbo rather than one of these cheapo aftermarket ones on Amazon. And we'd be able to release this clamp here, which is also separately serviced, and be able to put the two pieces back together. That would be one way to reduce the cost of this repair. You'd also have to, of course, release the clip so that you could take the rod off so that you could separate these pieces. But in our case, we saw what the problem was, and we're going to go the route of just replacing this whole turbocharger. Now, like I said, I don't believe this one has failed yet, but it is about 6 years old, maybe 7. So it's just a matter of time before it goes. You saw how much work it was to get here. We can get a core credit on the GM one by turning it in back to General Motors on a new one. I'll put some links in the description for all these parts. I'll also show in a bit later in the video what the cost estimates were from the local General Motors dealer in my area and how much I did the same repair for. So let's go to laying out all the new parts. All right, guys, so here's all of our parts exploded out that we're going to be assessing whether we can reuse or not. And I'll go through all of these different things with the numbers. So obviously the gasket is shot. It's metal, so it can be recycled. The replacement gasket from General Motors is a 555-65348. So we'll be using one of those. The retainer, even though it's chrome plated and some of the chrome is peeling off of it, it's still pretty thick steel and it's still functional, so we'll keep that. There's no recommendation in the service manual to swap that out. All of these nuts, exhaust nuts that we had, are all going to be recycled. They have to be discarded. They cannot be reused. They're torque to yield. And we're going to replace them with 8 of 555-65352. Now we had our studs that we separated from some of them, and then we had our broken stud. I'll show you in a little bit what we ended up doing with that. But for the one that broke, we're going to be replacing it with a 905-00560. That's the GM number for the stud. You can see, same size as our original one. Interestingly enough, I could not locate these studs at a Chevrolet dealer, but I was able to find them at a Buick dealer. They're hard to find online too. Not something that often busts on you. All right, so our oil line. So this is recommended to be replaced, especially if it's an earlier design that is missing this heat shield. So it should definitely be replaced if it's the earlier design. It can get clogged up inside. Kind of think of it like plaque on your arteries. As the cool down happens in the engine, the oil that's in here can slowly dry up and build up and build up and build up, and eventually this lubrication line gets clogged off. That's one of the things that kills these. So just general rule of thumb, swap it out. Now if you've already changed it because it was leaking within the last couple of years or so, I guess you could keep it, but you'd have to change out these 2 seals on either side of the banjo bolt. So first I'll show you the complete swap out. And the part number for one of those if I can find it here in my pile of items, it's going to be a 25200947 is the current design for that. Includes the seals on both sides. If you end up reusing yours and just want to swap out the seals, they're 555-71900, one each. You'd need to have 2 on either side of that banjo bolt, 1 and 2, if you end up keeping it. All right, so the next thing we said was we want to swap out this because of the rubber. Now we're going to keep the clamp because of, you mentioned earlier in the video, this was just recently swapped out, but we're going to replace the unit. Now the unit's part number is 555-67067. And that gives you the rubber, the heat shield, the mounting, and then this quick connect. So you notice it's missing the fitting. So the fittings and their seal, which is the same number we showed on the oil inlet pipe, same kind of seals used in all of these, has to be done separately. So we are going to replace that as well. And the number for that is 251-99813. And what that gives you is one fitting and one seal. Should turn this up this way so we can see what's in these bags. All right, so then that leaves us the inlet side, and I'm just going to go ahead and replace that as well. So same deal, 555-68031, banjo bolt, both seals, and then the quick connect, new heat shield. That's going to replace our part here. And we'll go ahead and put another one of these same quick connect fittings, 251-99813, which includes our seal. Now we've got the gasket for the turbo oil drain, and then this plastic hybrid kind of guy here that gave us so much trouble breaking up. All that mess gets replaced with the 555-87-854. Includes the gasket on top, includes the O-rings, ready to go. These V-clamps have to be discarded. They're one-time use. That gets replaced with 555-65351. The seal between the turbo and the cat, metal seal, this gets tossed. Gets replaced with 555-70704. All right, the last guy we've got here would be the turbo itself. And the turbo assembly is a 252-01063. If you pick this up from a GM dealer or an AC Delco dealer, you'll have a core credit sitting in the old one as long as it's a GM one. Put it in the same box, return it back, just like you see on the sticker here, and you get credit for the unit when you turn it back in, which reduces some of your cost. All sealed, genuine GM. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this guy out of the box. I'm going to show you mounting these quick connects and what their torque values are. Then we'll attach these pipes to both of them. And we'll go ahead and get that oil line on, torque value for these two bolts. And then we'll show what we ended up doing with the broken stud. And then we'll go back and get some of the stuff back together. You know, this bolt here that's kind of scratched up because somebody tried to take it off with a regular socket, that'll be tossed, and we'll use a salvage yard replacement. We still have to go to the salvage yard, get a bolt in the left lift bracket. We'll transfer these standoffs for this guy onto the new turbocharger, and then we'll get it all put back together. I'll show you a couple of tips. I'm not going to go back through everything. It's kind of like the reverse of what we saw, but I'll show you a couple of tips, especially for how you get this guy in. The technique I'm going to be doing is a service manual technique where we're going to go ahead and mount this to the turbo and then install it with all one piece. I'll show you that's a two-man job. One person underneath to kind of guide this thing in, and one person on top to kind of position it. Let's get to it. All right, guys, just to catch us up in the manual where we left off earlier, we talked about the special tool, what it's for and why it's in the manual, how you can avoid not having to need it if you're careful with the torquing and not over torquing. We got that coolant inlet off. We showed how to drain that out nice and clean. We talked about several times today about the fact that these seal rings have to be discarded. We talked about the oil drain from the turbocharger and getting access to these two little E10s. It's also important to discard that metal gasket that sits on the top of that pipe. Now, I showed you earlier in the clip the pipe part number that's complete, but maybe you've replaced your pipe recently and you don't need to swap the whole thing out. Here's the gasket part number, 555-85155. That's just the gasket for the top of that oil pipe if you end up not having to replace the whole thing. Then we went through and talked about removing the exhaust manifold studs, the fact those have to be nuts, and the fact those have to be discarded. And we talked about the problems we had where a couple of the studs came off and one broke. And then we removed the turbocharger, and of course we're going to discard the turbocharger gasket. So at this point we're ready to start reinstalling. We've cleaned the sealing surface on the cylinder head. At the same time, we talked about the fact that we've got a little bit of a crevice on that port all the way over to the left here in this view in the picture you see. And I'll show you as we get the assembly going how we're going to address that and the product that we're going to use to give us a good seal between the new gasket and that particular defect. As we keep going here, you would mount this guy up and you install these pieces. We're going to jump ahead though because we're going to install some of this ahead of time, right? So I'm going to put the oil pipe and the coolant pipes on ahead of time. Just for reference here, there's a particular order to tightening those nuts. We'll get into that again. We'll come back when we actually get ready to mount it with those new copper-clad nuts. But for now, we're going to go ahead and start assembling some of these components. So if I open up our box here, and since we're going to be sending this back as a core credit, we're going to be careful not to damage any of the packing material because we're going to reuse it. There's our new turbo. GM, take this out. We're just going to use this box like a little table for a moment. And we're going to flip this guy over. So you can see there's a piece of foam that's stuck inside here. This is pre-oiled, at least nowadays. Probably the earlier ones wasn't. This one's pre-oiled. So we're going to put our pipe right there. We can discard this. You can see our mating surfaces, other than some packing material, are nice and machined. We'll clean them off with brake clean just to get rid of the anti-corrosion material that they've coated on them. And then here's our two fittings for our coolant inlet and outlet lines. So let's go ahead and start with our drain pipe. Got a couple of E10s here. Now the pipe is oriented in such a way that, think back to when we took it off. It's going to be going in such a way that it twists like this. Just going to hand tighten these at first. This way also, by doing it with this technique, we don't have to fool around with trying to get these back in with the awkward access that we have. Now when we get to actually installing this, we're going to put fresh motor oil all over this pipe piece here and these two O-rings, as well as the female piece that it fits into. All right, we'll torque that down in a moment. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to grab our two 17mm fittings. They're both the same. You put them in just like this, no pipe thread. That's what these seal rings are for. Yeah. Just hand tighten these for now. All right, and then like I said, these are 17. This is an E10. We'll go back to our service manual. We're going to reference what the torque values are, come back, torque them up, and then we'll pop in our quick connects for the pipes. All right, guys, so those two E10s, we're going to be tightening to 8 Newton meters or 71 inch-pounds. And then those two 17mm fittings, we're going to pop back here where they talk about disassembling them in another section of the service manual. And by the way, I want to show this because there's a technique, there's a tool rather, if you are going to retain those quick fittings and just change out the pipes, there's a special tool that you see here that it's kind of like the things that were used to remove fuel line fittings. You can pop that guy in there, and then it allows you to remove the pipe if for some reason that you were just changing out the pipe. I'm just going to be changing out all this after all the work that we did to get in here. And this guy, when you go reassemble him, number 2 and 1 go together, 20 Newton meters or 15 foot-pounds. So I'm going to pop over here. We'll do our 2 E10s at 71 inch-pounds first. And you can see why it was so hard when we were underneath the vehicle to get access to this guy. Even out of the vehicle, it's not a really good fit. All right, so we got that part done. A little jet going overhead. Wait till that passes. So we talked about the design of this pipe, right? Metal and then down to plastic. And thinking about why would the engineers have done something like this? Well, during assembly, it is very helpful to have this be flexible. So it's helpful to get this in with this, or if you're just changing this piece out without removing the turbo, which can be done, just removing those same nuts that secure the catalytic converter, or the front catalytic converter, or maybe even removing it, will give you the access you need to change out just this pipe. And again, that flexibility is supposed to be there for that. All right, let's go over here and reset our torque to 20 Newton meters. And I'm going to pop our 17 millimeter bolt on in place of our E10. And we'll get these guys torqued up. All right, we're all ready to insert our pipes. And at that point, we're ready to reassemble. All right, guys, with this orientation, with the manifold mating surface here, and the connection to the cat here, oil drain pipe here, the inlet is going to connect on to this top one. Just get it till it snaps in. Make sure it's snapped in good. And then the outlet goes on this one. And by the way, you can see, if you kind of bring the camera over here, there's like a little line here. Let me pull this out for a second. So there's a indentation where the clip inside grabs it, and then there's a white line to show you how far in you needed to press it. And you'll hear it click. And then while we got it in there, we can see the white line is where it's supposed to be on both of these. All right, the last thing. So we said we were going to take the clip, the spring clamp off of the old one because we had just recently replaced it. What if we hadn't? So if you don't have one, and yours is rusty or corroded, you're supposed to replace them if they are. It's a 905-306-42 is the GM number for that. All right, we're finally ready to reverse everything. All right, guys, let's talk about this broken bolt, right? You can make a whole video just on these kind of problems, and this video is not about this, but just a few tips on what we ended up doing. You can take the studs that you have and figure out how much is broken in there to give you an idea if it's not flush. This one broke off flush. So the best and quickest thing to do is just to take, I'm just going to show an inverted view here on the block. The quickest thing to do is to put a nut, hold it with a pair of long nose pliers, get your MIG welder, and build it up and try to take it off that way. You think about how much torque was on this thing when we were trying to get it off, because somebody clearly over-torqued those exhaust those exhaust nuts. They're only 71 inch-pounds is what they're supposed to be. But you can give this kind of approach a try. Weld it up. The heat will help break what's going on with the steel against the aluminum, and you might be able to wrench it off. If it breaks in deeper, then what I would suggest to do is just to drill it out and stick a helicoil in there, or a time cert, right? There's different products like this. I wouldn't even fool around with this. When you try and, if it's broke off flush, this technique is pretty reliable. If it's not, just drill it out and move on. You got more important things to do than screw around with things like this. Now, what I would say you don't do is some of these other kinds of products, right? These kinds of extractor sets. This one here is the kind that you hammer in, and this one here is the kind that you screw in. I do use these from time to time. I would not use something like this, though, in the situation we had, and the reason is we saw how much torque that was under when it broke. If one of these breaks off inside, either type, they're made of very, very hardened steels. You won't be able to drill them out, and you just took a problem that was an annoyance into a disaster. So stay away from this kind of stuff when you're dealing with fasteners that are stuck inside the head or the engine block. I would go for the welding technique or just drilling it out and replacing it. If you feel like this is all you've got, I would try to stay away from this type when you're dealing with steel inside of aluminum, because it's going to, when you hammer it in, it's going to cause the piece to expand into the aluminum. You'll have some chance with something like this, and then taking your acetylene torch and heating up the aluminum head around the stud. Don't heat up the stud or the extractor. Don't give it any more than maybe, 8 to 9 foot-pounds of force. If it's not coming out like that, guys, you're going to break this extractor off. It's not worth trying. Anyway, hope those tips help you out. All right, guys, we're about ready to put this in. Just a couple of things, right? Make sure you put your new sealing ring on the cat first. Gave that part number earlier. Make sure you put your new V-clamp on first and get it down below the mating surface so it's not in the way, so that we can reposition the cat when we need to and get it back into its place. You can see that I ended up just putting 3 new studs in here, even though we retrieved the old ones, because the one that broke, I figured I would up my chances of having 3 out of 8 be brand new, and that's how we ended up going that. We got the other broken one out, and we put that in there. I've got these ports all plugged off to keep debris out. Let me show you the technique for installing this. Just going to pick up the new turbo here off the ground. And again, while we got it on the ground, we've got the ports on this guy all sealed off as well, just to avoid any critters crawling in there, that sort of thing. We've got everybody cleaned up. So the way you're going to put this in, you're going to need a helper to hold it on the 2 ends of the manifold like this, while you or the helper goes underneath. And in that view we showed before, where you can see where the end of this oil drain pipe goes, you can guide it into the hole down there and get it situated. You want to have it snap into the block with this piece here, and then you can come back up top and continue putting this on. Now, of course, before you do that, make sure you've got your exhaust gasket installed, manifold gasket. And in our case, since we had that problem, make sure that you've done some type of treatment for that. Now, what I'm going to do, I took a look at a couple of different products, but the one I eventually decided on was this one. I was also looking at the JB Weld high heat putty, but my feeling with this particular problem is, we've got an aluminum cylinder head, we've got a stamped steel gasket, and we've got a cast iron manifold. And there's going to be some flex from the dissimilar metals. We're right at the exhaust port, so it's going to be really hot and under pressure. So I felt something that had some flex would do better. This particular material is meant for making header and manifold gaskets. So that's what I'm going to use. It's a very, as you saw in the earlier clip, it's a very thin indentation. And the JB Weld type product I was concerned was going to crack. My secondary thing was, if it did come loose and end up inside the turbo, something silicone-based like this isn't going to damage the turbine. Something hard like epoxy might. So this is what we're going to use with a razor blade just to fill in that little divot there as we put the gasket on. All right, so let's get all set up and get this guy put together. All right, guys, this is a view underneath, just showing you really quick, convenient way for installing this lower oil drain connection. Just take like this 90-degree type of long nose plier, and you can lever it into position. What you want to do is you want to make sure that it snaps on that little metal tab. All right, guys, we're all done here. Let's see how she sounds now, and then we'll go over some of the final torque values that you need to know about finishing this up. So super quiet now. We got that problem fixed. So let's take a look at the final torque values that we need to wrap this up. All right, guys, let's look at those final torque values. So we got through the whole removal, and now we're at the point of reinstalling. So exhaust manifold gasket, and then the unit goes into place. Your 8 copper-clad exhaust nuts go into place. Spin them on by hand to begin with. And then here's our torque sequence. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 in that order only. And the torque value is 71 inch-pounds or 8 newton meters. A very handy tool for this step is a 1/4 inch drive torque wrench, because you're going to have some situations where it's very tight quarters like we saw getting off. It's going to be even tighter getting it back on. As we go on the rest of this, so after that is assembled, the next thing that you would do, because we already have our drain installed beforehand, the next thing is going to be getting our coolant inlet pipe on. So remember, we got a 17 millimeter bolt sealing washer. We got the pipe fitting of the banjo and another sealing washer, and then it screws into the block. When this guy is installed, we talked earlier about there being a special holding tool to prevent it from getting bent. And all I do to prevent that same problem is I take a really long flathead screwdriver, slide it right under that little fitting so that it doesn't get a lot of stress on it when you're torquing it down, and then you go ahead and torque that 17 down to 22 foot-pounds or 30 newton meters. All right, so now we've got the 8 nuts on and we've got the coolant inlet. We're going to move over to the coolant outlet or the return. We're going to hook up our hose and get our spring clamp on, which we see right down here, right? Get our hose and our spring clamp back on here. And then there's a long 10 millimeter retaining nut. Okay, they show that in this picture here as part 7. And that's same as the exhaust nut, 71 inch-pounds or 8 newton meters. So now the cooling system's done, and we can install our oil feed pipe. We route the oil feed pipe in, push it in, and then right down here, right, we've got that small E10 that holds it in on this side. And then I've already got the shield on so you can't see it, but there's that 1045 banjo. And so what you're going to see on that is right here in this view, right? So this nut here is the one I was referring to that holds down the part you pushed in. And then there's your T45 sealing washer, banjo pipe assembly, and another sealing washer. And the torques on those guys is that bolt that's just holding it against the block, that E10 is 89 inch-pounds or 10 newton meters, and that big T45 is 22 foot-pounds or 30 newton meters. So now we got cooling and lubrication all hooked up. You're going to go underneath, as I showed earlier, and you're going to snap that drain into place on the block, and so that completes the whole feed of coolant and oil. At this point, you can start to top off your reservoir in the back on these Cruzes, in the front on the Sonics, wherever it is on your car, you can start to top off that and start checking for any leaks. The next thing you're going to go do is you're going to reassemble your hoses, right? So if you happen to have removed just this one, some folks like to take off this one to give them better access to stick their hand in here. Either way, 1, 2, 3 hose clamps. There's no torque value on these. Just snug them up. Don't go crazy. Then the bottom pipe on the inlet, same thing. Right down here, there's that other clamp. Just tighten him up right there, and then you'll be done with the air system. So then that's only going to leave one other thing, which is the catalytic converter. We had put our new sealing ring there. We've got our new V-clamp. We get this guy into position, put the nuts on to the bracket that hold the cat, and then we get this guy started. He's going to get torqued down to 115 inch-pounds. So we're going to go back to our manual. We'll take a look at that section here. All right, so installation procedure. We've got our 2 nuts, the upper one and the lower one, and then we've got our V-clamp. The bracket nuts are 16 foot-pounds, 22 newton meters, and what I would do on that bottom one here, that nut that's sitting right below us, right down here, that was kind of high torque when we tried to take it off with an extension here, I would put just a dab of anti-seize right at the shoulder of the stud. That's the only place I would use anti-seize on this whole thing. And then the actual clamp is right here, 115 inch-pounds or 13 newton meters. So at that point, we've got all of the exhaust system rehooked up. The last thing that we would have would be the shield with the 3 E10s holding it. And that is right here. So our 3 E10s holding the shield on. those all get 71 inch-pounds, or 88 Newton meters, 71 inch-pounds. Very common torque value in a lot of this. And at that point, we've got everything re-torqued up and reconnected, and we're ready to do, we've already tested for static leaks by just letting the coolant fill up. And, you'll take the reservoir top off, let the air work its way out. And again, this is a Cruze. The reservoir's on the back. A Sonic, the reservoir's in the front. And same engine, doesn't matter. You're going to have some differences like that. And then you'll be able to give it its first startup. And again, check for leaks. I actually don't install this shield until I've given it its first 10-minute startup, just so you can see in there and make sure you're not getting any coolant leaks, you're not getting any oil leaks. Then you can let it cool off again, put the shield on, and take it for a test drive. Anyway, this repair is all wrapped up. The last few things I'm going to show you is a couple of more parts explosion details that might help you along with those part numbers I gave, right? So here's the breakdown of the whole assembly. Now here's the turbo separated from the exhaust manifold and the clamp that connects the two of them together. These are not sold separately, I mentioned earlier, but the clamp is. There's your exhaust manifold gasket, there's the stud, there's the exhaust nut, there's the V-clamp and the nut, and the bolt, the sealing ring, and then there's the catalytic converter. There's our bottom nut that holds it on this bracket. There's our nut number 608 that holds it onto the upper bracket. Of course, it has its own shield and the O2 sensor. And then here's a blow-up of our cooling assembly. So we can see here's there's actually a little bit more than just what's on the turbo, but here's the back side with the two pipes, the two quick connects, and the two sealing washers that go in the back of the turbo assembly. Here's the view from this side, same thing, pipe, fitting, sealing washer, so it's just two different view A. What they're trying to show you here is like a blow-up of view A up here. And then here's our cooling inlet, which is on the banjo fitting with the 17mm bolt and the two sealing washers that goes into the block. And then there's our retaining our retaining bolt that's holding in the other piece that then gets held on with that snap ring. And then the last thing I had to show you here is just another view from below of the oil system. There's our drain, bolts that hold it, gasket, O-rings are available separately, and there's our upper inlet, two sealing washers, banjo bolt. There's also, of course, O-rings on there. They're not showing it in this picture, but the bolt that retains it is right in the drawing. For whatever reason, they didn't draw it, exploded out. Anyway, I hope all this detail helps you out. It only took me about 20 minutes to reinstall this thing. It probably took an order of magnitude longer to get it out, but once you figure this out, you can see why the dealer techs are able to do this pretty quickly. I'll put links to all these parts in the description, and I'll put links to some other information that you may find useful. If you got questions or comments on how you do this or how I did this, go ahead and leave them below. If you found this video useful, it saved you some money, hit that like button, hit that heart button. Thanks for watching.